For all of the negative stories we hear about millennials and their possible dismal futures, there are a few who are thriving in this uncertainty. And two of them join us now. In Fredericton, New Brunswick, via Skype, there's Grayson Johnson. She's a recent Cambridge University graduate, now starting up her own website. And with us in studio, Roland Mascarenas. He is a research associate at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. We welcome you, and Grayson, welcome you back to the program. You've been on here a couple times before. It's good to see you again. Of course, we want to remind everybody who's watching that you are part of this conversation. So producer Mark Brosens is hosting a Twitter chat right now. Chime in, use the hashtag AgendaTVO. We'd love to hear from you. All right, we have been, I should just set this up a little bit. We have been all week long here on TVO with a sort of a facetiously named series called Dude, Where's My Future? Based on that movie, Dude, Where's My Car? Because the millennials feel, many of them, that the agreement that they made to go to university, go into debt, be ready for the workplace, hasn't happened because the workplace isn't ready for them. And the dreams are on hold. And so we wanted to get a sense, we've talked a lot about that this week, we wanted to get a sense, Grayson, to you first, about how well you're doing, because it's not all doom and gloom out there. So start us off. What took you to Cambridge University in the first place?
I wanted to do a master's degree, and Cambridge was just a good place for me to do it. So I had finished undergrad, and I had about a year of thinking to do and what I wanted to do next. And I decided I was going to do this master's program, and now I'm back and trying to figure out what to do next. What degree did you graduate with? I have an MPhil in something called Planning, Growth, and Regeneration, which is kind of the Cambridge way of saying urban planning. I was going to say, that sounds very touchy-feely, so translate into English means urban planning. Got it. And where did you do your undergrad? I did my undergrad at the University of Guelph. And what did you get there? I have a Bachelor's of Arts honors in International Development and the Biophysical Environment. Gotcha. Boy, these degrees are a lot more highfalutin than they were back in my day. But anyway, okay. They're just long titles, Steve. Grayson, are you in debt? I wasn't after undergrad, and I am after my master's degree. How much was Cambridge a year? Oh, goodness. In Canadian dollars, I mean, it's hard to say because the actual tuition school fees are, I think they were about $27,000. But then you also have your living expenses on top of that. So after my master's degree, I have about $30,000 in debt. So was it 2 years in Cambridge that you did? It was actually 1 year, which is one of the reasons that I think the program was really great, because it means that I'm $30,000 in debt instead of, $120,000 in debt. Okay, good for you. Now, you're not from the Maritimes, so why are you living there? It was just a place I've always wanted to move to. My partner has a great job out here, and I actually have kind of denser career networks out here. So, yeah, it's been a really lovely move so far. I've only been here for 2 weeks, but I've really, really enjoyed it. Feels good so far? Yes. Have you got a job yet? I just applied for a position yesterday, so I will be able to tell you next week if I have a job yet. But I'm also keeping myself busy on the side, as you mentioned, with kind of a vlogumentary website project. Okay. One of the things we've heard over the week is that millennials don't necessarily apply for a job or get the job. They're doing 2 or 3 or 4 different things which constitute, in their entirety, I guess, a career. Is that your plan as well? I would say that contract work is probably something I'll find in my future for a long time still. And there's part of that that's great because you have the freedom to kind of pick and choose what you want to learn and the skills that you'd like to pick up. But there's also not a lot of security in it. And so it's a great thing to do maybe for the next 5 or 6 years. But if I were to get to a point where I were thinking about having a family or something like that, I'd probably want something a lot more stable. And I'm of the persuasion that I'd like to kind of create that job myself. So in the meantime, I'm looking for people that I can learn from. And that's kind of the beauty of doing contract work, is you just get to pick your boss instead of picking your job. Gotcha. Okay. Grayson, thanks for setting the table. I want to go to Roland now, and we'll go through some of the same stuff. You're from where? I'm born in Mississauga, but I'm from Toronto. And your post-secondary involves what? So I did my Bachelor of Arts with honors in sociology at York University. Graduated in 2009, and I also did a Bachelor of Education at OISE at the University of Toronto, and then I graduated with my Master of Education from Harvard University in 2012. You've been to 3 different universities. Yes, I guess you can say I'm a well-educated worldly man, but I think my parents would probably disagree with that. How old are you? I'm 26. 26, okay. And are you carrying any student debt? None. How did you manage that?
A couple of reasons. The first reason why is I applied for scholarships and was accepted most recently at Harvard. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is I made a lot of my educational decisions knowing how much student debt I would have to take on and making what I believe was the right decisions. Some universities cost more than each other, and I made those decisions strategically. I also have the wonderful support of my parents who agreed to support me financially, so that's a wonderful pleasure I have.
So was the Harvard thing a free ride?
It wasn't a free ride. It was it's a small. There is definitely some tuition involved. They try to bait you in a little bit, just to hook you a little bit, tease you a little bit. But I definitely did have to pay for that.
And what piece of paper do you get when you leave Harvard?
A Master of Education, which is an ed.m. So it's an m.ed over here, but other way around down there.
Have you got that framed on your wall at home?
Framed on my wall, put on my Facebook, everywhere I can brag.
You are, not to take anything away from York or Oise, but you're a Harvard graduate. That's not bad.
Yeah, it's an okay university. It's not bad. It's a pretty good university.
Almost as good as U of T or Laurentian.
Almost.
Okay. Did you have to work while you were going to school?
No, I did not.
So your folks really, they paid the shot.
Absolutely.
Boy, do you owe them, man.
I definitely do, but I think the arrangement was that instead of those hours that many millennials spend, socializing in the cafeteria or with their boyfriend and girlfriend, I was actively involved not only with leadership activities, but also spending that extra time working hard.
At your classes, but not at Starbucks, which a lot of other people have to do.
Absolutely true.
And could you just let us in a little bit on those discussions about how much the parents expected, what they expected of you when you went off to all of these different universities, whether you were to make any kind of a contribution, whether you wanted to and they said no, or how did it go?
Sure. So the wonderful thing about my family is we have, I guess we could say, daily, weekly discussions about these type of issues that impact a lot of families, and we've been having this for a number of years. The philosophy of my parents has been always quite straightforward, which is we want you to focus on school. We don't want things distracting you from school. Things will happen. You'll want to meet different people. You'll want to have some fun, but we want you to make sure you have a great education because you won't have that same opportunity later in life. And this really sets the foundation for your future views in life, the way you think, and so forth. So my parents definitely wanted me to focus on my education.
Okay, let me start to pick yours and Grayson's brains on the following. When I was your age, the idea, I think, was kind of get a spouse, get a house, get a car, have a job, not a bunch of jobs, but a job, be able to take a vacation every year. That's the Canadian dream. Is it still?
I think it is still for sure, but it's delayed. And there will have to be significant reductions and rethinking in some of these ideas. So traditionally, there was this linear path. You go to high school, you go to university, you get your job, you get married, and so forth, right? You have your pension, etc. With this generation, as Grayson just recently said, there's a lot more dynamic change that's happening in the marketplace and in our society. So what I've traditionally done is I've spent a lot of thought thinking about how is this plan going to go into play. I live at home and I love it there. I'm on purpose. I'm saving a lot of money that way, not only in the amount I'd be paying for rent, but also in food costs. On top of that, I also have great emotional support. So there's a lot of different things that we need to rethink about when it comes to this linear pathway in today's society. So I definitely think it's possible, but there has to be reductions, and that includes in such a materialistic and consumerist society, which millennials absolutely love. If you look at the Toronto International Film Festival, the foodie culture, it's all about drinks after work. These add up over time. So maybe we need to rethink what our priority should be as millennials.
Have you personally set your sights lower on the more materialistic aspects of life?
Absolutely. I think the great thing, even such things like this show, is that it's very intellectually stimulating, and these all often are pretty cheap in prices as you compare to other things like going to a top bar or going to a TIFF premiere, which costs nearly $50 though. So for me, it's about understanding what you gain the most joy from and finding the people that really bond around those ideas.
Gotcha. Grayson, that sort of quote-unquote Canadian dream I just described a little while ago, is that part of your thinking when you were growing up as well?
That would actually be my nightmare. I would hate it.
That's your nightmare?
Yeah.
What don't you like about it?
I don't really see myself. maybe I'll get a house in the future. Maybe I'll buy a house, but that's not really something that I'm really interested in right now. I want to avoid owning a car for as long as physically possible. That saves me right there. I think when we talk about materialism, not having a car saves me about $7,000 a year, which is huge. That's a major income bracket that you're just jumping by biking and taking transit and walking and picking where you live carefully. So I don't want the car, don't want the house. You know, what was the other one you said?
Well, you've got a significant other already, right?
Yeah. But
Okay.
I mean, we're not rushed to tie the knot or anything. So, yeah, I do not think that my metrics of a happy future are the same as.
Interesting. So you want the freedom from a lot of the things that tie you down, as opposed to the freedom to whatever, buy a house, buy a car, etc. Is that right?
Yeah, but it's not just about freedom. It's like I actually think those are really poor economic investments. I mean, I think buying a car would be a very silly thing for me to do.
Okay. Well, you live in Fredericton, and I guess you got a bike, and you live close to what you need.
I
And
live downtown, and I have my bike, and hopefully I'll be able to rent a car when I need it. I mean, it is very difficult here, I have to say, because there isn't the rail networks that we have in Ontario. But I went through undergrad, and I lived in Toronto for a year without a car. And yeah, it's inconvenient at times, but I mean, it's not so inconvenient that it makes it worth spending, $7,000 a year that I don't have for like not even a nice car, just to get around. I could do without, and I will try to for as long as I can.
it was always a given, though, Grayson, that the kids would try to do economically better and have more kind of material comforts of life than their parents. Is that an aspiration of yours?
No, I don't think so. I'd just like to be happy, and I mean, I would like to be able to help my family and support my family in the same way that they supported me, but I don't think that that translates into a lot of the same, I guess, physical comforts.
So you're not feeling this pressure. I mean, you have a lot of education like Roland does, but you don't feel this pressure to go out and get the six-figure job and have all the latest trinkets and that kind of thing?
No, and I mean, I don't actually know what I would do with that money if I had it.
I can give you some ideas.
I mean, if I was stupidly rich, I would get a baby grand piano and I would get a granny flat for my mom somewhere. But like, I don't know what I would do with six figures.
Well, that's kind of neat. Okay, so your outlook is a little bit different. That's great. Let's introduce a few other people to our discussion right now, because we're going to broaden our discussion and also help us out with a little bit of numbers as well. We got a pollster here. So, joining us now in the nation's capital is Linda Schweitzer. She's a professor at the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University. And with us here in the studio is David Coletto. He's a founding partner and CEO at Abacus Data. He's the pollster I just talked about. And Benjamin Tull, who is Deputy Chief Economist at the CIBC World Markets. And of course, we're going to welcome back Grayson Johnson in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and Roland Mascarenhas at the University of Toronto. Okay, David, to you first, because how old are you? Can I ask?
31.
You're 31, so you're sort of a millennial.
I'm on the cusp.
You're on the cusp. You're on the outside edge of it.
So
right. Millennials we generally think of as people born in the early 80s to the early 2000s.
right.
What you just heard, the aspirations, the worldview of these two, does that jibe with your sense of things?
I think Roland, based on the research we've done, and you look at other research, even Canada, United States, probably aligns closer with the general representative view of, I think, the generation. Whereas Grayson's probably, at least in the research that we've done, the exception to the rule. That if you actually ask millennials that description of a life, most of them say that's what they want. They want to get married. They want to own a home or a condo or whatever configuration of housing it is. They want not necessarily a stable job for their entire life. I think that's where there's some different values. But we see a lot of similar values between the baby boom generation, their parents, particularly the older members of the millennial generation, and that generation, that those values have been transferred down. And there are exceptions in every generation. But I think
Grayson's one of them.
And Grayson's one of them. Whereas, if you look at my trajectory, a lot of my friends, we have that more traditional view of, everyone I know is getting married.
But I see Roland, even when he describes to me, he points out all the good things about living at home, doesn't have to pay rent, doesn't have to pay for food. But I noticed a little twinge of something when you said it. like it wasn't your first choice or wasn't the most fabulous thing, or you certainly hope to be on your own someday. Is that right?
Well, actually, I beg to differ.
Okay.
I said it with actually a bit of conviction, and because this actually, it gets my back hairs up a little bit. I find in today's society we've become so defensive about living at home. I think the great things about Ontario is that we have so many wonderful immigrants who have adapted to this country, but a staple of the immigrant mentality is if you don't need to spend the money, why spend it? If I don't need to spend the money if I can afford to live at my parents in downtown Toronto, why would I live somewhere else to prove that I'm independent?
Well, that's it, because I think you can tell me, but the values of every sort of next generation is, I got to get the hell out of home. I got to set up my own. It is,
unless I can't afford it, or, and this is what's also interesting about the relationship between generations is, it's known that millennials generally get along with their parents better than Gen X did with their parents. Gen X was this independent generation that wanted to get as far away from their parents as they could. Millennials actually, I can go out for dinner with my parents and enjoy it and not see it as like a chore.
They're not embarrassed to be seen with their parents.
No.
What a nice thing.
Yeah, Mom, you can walk me down the street and give me a kiss as you drop me off to school. That's not as I think a negative that it used to be.
Gotcha. Linda Schweitzer in Ottawa, just from an economic perspective, give me your reaction to what you've just heard.
Well, I'm not an economist, but I do get called occasionally to talk about the youth facing unemployment, and I have to say, situation is not great right now for youth, and they're taking longer to leave home, and that's been documented. We're calling that sort of an arrested adulthood. They're taking a little bit longer to get into maturity. In a lot of the research you look at now, they talk about youth up until the age of 29, and I think, Steve, you said the other day as well that you're also approaching youth to be up to the age of 29. 30 years ago, 29 was a mature person with probably with a couple of kids and a house. So that there is a bit of delay happening where people are taking a little bit longer to get established and to decide what they want to do and to leave their parents' homes. And they're lucky that their parents are in a situation, the baby boomers are in a situation where they can afford to keep them in a nice lifestyle until they're ready to be established on their own.
But let me just jump in for a second to say that Roland described the phenomenon that he's engaged in right now in a very positive way, not in a negative way. He didn't see this still living in his parents' home as in any way negative. In fact, it's keeping the family together. It's saving him some money. Is that more representative of where young people are thinking today, in your experience?
People are certainly staying home longer. I don't have any evidence to say, and I think it's great when both parties are both happy with it, as Roland described. You do hear anecdotally about a lot of people that whose children have come back after university, moved back home, and the parents are not as thrilled to have them as Roland's parents are obviously to have him. There is an expectation that children will eventually empty the nest, and certainly as the baby boomers move to retirement, and with their pension funds having drooped recently, and healthcare costs looming in the future, they may not be able to afford it forever.
Benjamin, where are you coming from on this?
Well, I look at the numbers, and the numbers are telling us different stories. First of all, let's look at youth unemployment. Youth unemployment is 14%.
I got a graphic on that. Can I interrupt long enough to put the graphic up?
Absolutely.
This is from StatsCan, August 2013, so these are very fresh numbers. The unemployment rate in Canada, 7.1%. In the province of Ontario, 7.5%. But the youth unemployment numbers, youth defined as 15 to 24, 14.1%.
Exactly.
Is that a crisis?
14.1%. What is the long-term average of youth unemployment in Canada? 14%. So we are at the long-term average. In fact, in the 80s, it was 20%. In the 90s, it was more than 15%. So we're actually relatively low. So what's the problem? The problem is that relative to the adult population, we are at a record high. So it's not the youth unemployment rate, it's relative to adults. So there's so many dimensions here because, for example...
So there is no youth unemployment crisis in Canada today?
Well, there is relative to employment among adults. So clearly, you have a situation in which the rate is misleading. You have to look at relative to adult where you are in the cycle. Now, why is it important? For example, I'll give you one number which is very important. Everybody's talking about this youth unemployment. However, if you look at people aged 15 to 18, that are students, namely they are in high school, and you ask them, are you looking for a job? Many of them are saying yes. Can you find one? No. Then you are unemployed. If you take those unemployed high school students out of the calculations,
What's
the
the number?
unemployment rate goes down from 19% for this group to 5%. So what I'm saying is that if you are a high school student that is not happy with your allowances and you are unemployed because you're looking for a job, can you compare it to a 45-year-old person with 5 kids?
No, you can't. But on the other hand, if you're that 16-year-old kid whose parents don't have a lot of money and you're going to be relying upon yourself to pay your university tuition, you're not being able to get a job is a real thing.
That's exactly the issue. So this is a real problem. Now, why those young people cannot find a job? Because their parents have those jobs.
Yes.
And especially low quality jobs. Usually, high school students go and work in restaurants, but their parents are working in restaurants because the quality of employment among adult people has declined dramatically. So all of a sudden, the youth unemployment problem is actually a low quality of employment problem among adults. So that's one dimension of the problem. So you really have to look at the numbers. You mentioned youth unemployment 15 to 24. You know what? You cannot compare a 16-year-old person and a 22-year-old person.
Sure.
We have to break it into different segments. So you really have to look at the numbers and see where really the problem is. So again, we cannot distinguish just youth unemployment without looking at the labor market as a whole.
Linda, do you want to follow up on that?
I completely agree with everything that Benjamin said. I think it's important that we cut out and compare 20 to 23-year-old is a different group than a 15 to 16-year-old. The only thing there I would differ is I think there are high expectations in the youth today. Not necessarily in a sense of entitlement, as somebody said the other night, but there are high expectations. There's expectations with respect to the type of job that they're willing to take, expectations with respect to how much they're going to love the job, the first job that they get, to what extent the first job they get is going to fit perfectly with the dreams that they've had and with the training that they've received. And an expectation for lifestyle as well. And all of those things go together to make the future for very disappointed people.
Let me get Grayson to follow up on that from this angle. We talked about the fact that when they got rid of grade 13 or OAS or whatever you want to call it, suddenly you had high school students at the age of 17 or 18, instead of, I guess, 18 or 19, having to make very adult decisions about where their lives ought to be going. And I think I suggested that's too young. And as a result, a number of university or college students are taking classes that they just, they're not ready to make those kinds of decisions. Did you find that to be the case when you were at that time of your life?
I think if you're referring to what I think you're referring to, and that is, which field you decide to get your degree in and the kind of implications that has on the jobs that you're able to get after. Is that where you're going with this?
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I was never worried about that. But I've always had faith in myself that I'll figure it out. And I think that a lot of people, when they go into university, they are expecting university to be job training for them. And if that's the case, and there's nothing wrong with that, you're just wanting to go to school and have that be your qualification and be able to go straight into a job after and use that qualification, then maybe it is a good idea to pick a degree that acts as job training. But I knew that was not what I wanted, but I also have enough confidence in myself that I don't think that that's going to be a really limiting factor for me, because I've gone out of my way to equip myself with skills outside of school, and I've always made everything work so far. So yeah, it wasn't a concern for me.
Okay, good. Roland, when you graduated from high school, did you know immediately right away what field you wanted to go into? And
Absolutely not.
You didn't?
Absolutely not. I do know that I really enjoyed sports, and I had some great encouragement telling me I have the skill set to look at something along the lines of sales and marketing. But beyond that, just kind of something in the clouds. I didn't really have an idea of what that entailed. I do think this question was brought up in a previous episode. I don't think that extra year will really help, because you're still in the same type of culture and the same type of environment where these kids are not getting exposures to what these fields are. How many kids these days know what sociology entails or what a psychology degree entails? what I see is that a lot of these students do not have exposure to what training they're going to get at university and how that relates to the job market.
Okay, but let me follow up here. Did you graduate high school after grade 12?
Yes.
So there was no grade 13 when you went?
Yes.
And your initial track was to become a teacher? Yes?
I did my 4 years in undergrad in sociology, and I decided around the third year, through experimenting, volunteering at schools, that I worked at summer camps. This is something I've always been quite passionate about. I definitely could see myself as a teacher, and this comes quite natural to me, though.
Do you want to be a teacher for a living?
I was a teacher.
Right, and then you left teaching.
Yes, because you know what,
But this is my point. Because you were, I don't know, 17, 18 when you graduated high school, you got onto a track that you, in the fullness of time, discovered was really the wrong track. And I wonder if you had an extra year to think about it in high school, maybe you wouldn't have got on the wrong track.
Not necessarily, and the reasons why, because first and foremost, I love teaching, and I only had a one-year contract. And I mean, this is a whole discussion about the systemic aspect where there are not enough jobs for our young teachers, as was mentioned in the past episode. But I think what we're seeing is that the professional development aspect that a lot of young people require and would desire for their position is not being really properly implemented in the profession of teaching, which it is being implemented in other professions. There's management trainee programs for a lot of talented, smart kids coming out of Ivy or other schools. There's often retreat programs for students that have demonstrated themselves to be excellent at certain skills. Apprenticeship programs, but that's really missing in the teaching, which is why there's a 50% attrition rate.
Okay, Benjamin, let me get you in here on this then. We've been telling people all week long that if you learn more, you'll earn more. And I want to know if you have the numbers that confirm that the more education you get, it's certainly always been the deal in the past, that the more education you get, the better off you'll do, the better job you'll get, the more money you'll make. That's still the case, isn't it?
Absolutely. So what I'm saying here is that if you look at the university versus high school versus college, of course, BA is more than high school and MA is more than BA. But the gap is shrinking. In fact, over the past 7 years, the wages of high school graduates has risen twice as fast as wages of university graduates. So the gap is shrinking, although it's very, very sizable. So the question is why, and the answer is that the return to education is shrinking. Basically, we all know that what used to be high school is BA, but going back to the field of study, the issue is that we all know that if you go to and become an engineer, you will make a lot of money relative to somebody who is taking art history. However, if you look at the distribution of people who are going to art history, education, and those low-yielding fields, basically the same as 10 years ago. So although we are equipped with this knowledge, we haven't changed the way we behave, the way we choose our fields, because we are being told to
pursue
follow
your passion.
our dreams.
That's
of
right.
course.
That's right. Is
But
that bad advice?
What I'm saying here, and that's where I need some, we need some more information. I'm with you. We need a little bit, get to the system a little bit older, get this roadmap, provide young people with the options, and maybe if you provide a bit more assistance in math, maybe you'll get another 10% going to engineering, and you won't have this kind of problem, at least for this 10%. So it's very complex, but I think there are some solutions.
Okay, David, before we get to solutions, David, I want you, if you would, you've got some numbers that you brought along from your company, and I want you, if you would, to walk us through these numbers, because they do kind of paint a picture in making comparisons between how tough things are for millennials today versus previous generations and such. So if you would.
Let's start with first what millennials think. So we did a survey about a year ago where we asked millennials to agree or disagree with a number of statements. I'm not going to go through them all, but the basic summary of the research was that yes, millennials agree, I've been told I can do anything I want, right? So everyone agrees with that premise, that there's very high expectations. But two, millennials also, and this was 18 to 30-year-olds, so we weren't interviewing younger millennials at the time. But second, they recognize, they believe that it is harder to get ahead today than in the past. That it is, and that older generations don't understand that, right? So there is some cross-generational misconceptions. But when you look at I found some numbers that the Toronto Star published about 5 years ago now, so 6 years ago. So they're old, but they still show the difference. So yes, on the surface, probably youth unemployment's not a real factor. That's not what's driving it. But that return on investment we talk about for education, if we just look at minimum wage and the buying power of minimum wage in 1975 versus 2007, what's startling is that on some basic things like buying a pair of jeans or a carton of eggs, not a huge increase in terms of what it takes, how many hours you have to work for minimum wage to buy those products. Mm-hmm. But look at tuition, where in 1997 you would have to work about 254 hours to pay your $610 for your tuition, which for me and Roland and everybody else who's under 30 in this room, that's remarkable that it only costs $610 to go to university. You take it to $2007, you'd have to work 645 hours. So a lot of the problems stem from, yes, very high expectations, which I blame my parents for, and for society and sort of instilling this notion of self-esteem and you can't fail, you can do anything, with the rising cost of education and the debt that leaves us with. And so those two factors, yes, maybe finding a job isn't as difficult, it's we don't want to fail. And underemployment is almost as worse as unemployment for a lot of millennials.
Do you or did you feel a great deal of pressure either from parents or friends or the need to keep up with the Joneses or whatever to be successful?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Was that something you put on yourself or got from outside or what?
I think it was, my grandparents immigrated from Italy. They came in here with a working, very little and worked really hard and gave me the opportunity to do that. So because we were given so much, I had this sense that I had to do something with the opportunities that I got. And my parents are great, they're very generous, but they also had expectations that, if you work hard, you can do it, but you can do anything you want. And I'm doing what I want. I'm one of the lucky ones. I early in my career, I'm doing exactly what I love to do. But a lot of millennials, a lot of people my age aren't having that luck.
Grayson, have you felt the pressure either from parents or friends or relatives or yourself to be a success, for lack of a better way to put it?
Definitely no sort of oppressive pressure from anyone other than, even with myself, it's just, I wouldn't want to fail, but I wouldn't, there's not a huge amount of pressure to be the prime minister or anything like that.
Well, let me ask the guy with the Harvard degree. Do you? That's not too many Canadians. Can I make a guess here? Like 1/100th of 1% of Canadians probably have a Harvard degree, right? So you're in pretty select company. Do you feel a lot of pressure to be a superstar because of that?
Well, this is what's really interesting is that coming from a South Asian Canadian background, high expectations were normalized from a young age, and initially, a lot of immigrants to Canada have an economic migrant approach, which is we need to get into a stable job with great status and great income. But eventually, my parents kind of inverted that, which is they took some of the facets of that, but they also said there needs to be some intrinsic value. You have to be good at whatever you do. It doesn't matter whether you're a carpenter or you're a doctor, there's a certain level of expectation. And that was from the youngest age of 7, 8 years old. There's always a level of expectation, and that continued. So I actually told my parents at midnight when I was in Muskoka one day that I'm applying to Harvard, and they were completely caught off guard. I had been thinking about it for a while, and I said, this is what I wanted to do. I'm going to take that leap. And I was also fortunate to be accepted at U of T and Columbia as well.
Linda, do you see in your students this pressure, either from parents or from themselves, to be superstars?
Absolutely. I see more than just pressure. I see panic. I have said to them often, the message here is don't panic. You're not in university to get job training. Job training happens on the job. You will, get some part-time work, learn how to be an employee, get some skills. Every job can provide you with some skills that you can take to the next job. It doesn't matter what job you have. If you do a good job and you pay attention and you take your opportunities as they come, you will grow as a person and as an employee, and you'll have more to offer for the next job. It's not, I think there's an extreme amount of pressure for students, young people coming out of high school, to know what they want to do when they graduate, when they get their real career job. And I think that's too early. It's nice to make, they need to make a decision, as Grayson said, what I want to study, and then enjoy the journey of studying and growing, and then take the next job, take a job that you think is good, that will help you develop. It's not going to be your career job. You're not going to be there your whole career. This job will teach you some things, even if it doesn't work out. There's always going to be something that it can teach you, and they need to take that panic away, that they have to find the ideal job right away and be in exactly the correct program that will lead to that job. I think it's unrealistic, and coupled with their high expectations, it is going to lead to more and more pressure on them.
I want to follow up with Benjamin on something you said that I thought was very interesting, which is that job training happens on the job. And one of the things we've been hearing all week from millennials, Benjamin, is that it doesn't. That they're feeling this pressure to be superstars because there's not that much job training that happens on the job anymore. You are expected to have a great deal of skill before you get a job. And I just wonder, you work for one of the biggest employers in the country. Do you train people on the job to do these jobs?
Yes, we do all the time, but you're absolutely right. From a macroeconomic perspective, we don't see enough on-the-job training, not training whatsoever in some sectors like manufacturing. And when I talk to CEOs and I ask, how come you're not training? And they say, we are not in a business of training. We are in a business of making money.
They expect the post-secondary institutions to do it.
Well, last year I spent $20,000 training this guy, and he left the day after.
Huh.
So we need a system that will enable employers to start training without worrying about this kind of situation. Again, they are in a business of making money, not in a business of training, but on-the-job training is a very important element in this puzzle. We need it. Without it, we will not solve the problem.
Roland.
There's always this tension between universities promoting critical thinking and the love of Socrates and the arts on one aspect, and this raw practical element of job training on the other. And it seems these two kind of polarizing forces are being pushed even more against each other. I think the fundamental problem is that we haven't addressed that United States and Canada are amongst the worst countries in the OECD in terms of development and job training for young people. Now, part of that is warranted. If you're going to have a young person who's switching jobs twice a year, you're going to invest all this money into them and then go to another job. Why would they, as a corporation, want to invest it? That's one aspect. The second aspect is that when you have 100 applicants for one job, what is the need to train someone? There isn't that. So I think job training is needed, but at the same time, we have to look at it from the corporation side, which is they expect loyalty, they expect added value, and they're not getting that from their employees.
There's no loyalty either way these days, is there, David? I mean,
well, I was just going to respond and say, yes, we're moving around, but people blame millennials, right? They always blame us. But I think it's time, and we saw movements in Quebec, in Occupy, Idle No More, basically saying, you're not loyal to me as an employer, as an employee. You've taken a pension away, which is what's going to keep me and most people in their jobs. I don't get a pension. I don't get very good benefits. You hire me on contract work. So I think that, yes, sure, there's an expectation among millennials in the new workforce that if I don't like my job, I'm going to move. But we also don't see from employers, particularly private sector employers, the kind of loyalty that existed when my dad or my mom got their first job. And I think it's everybody's fault in a way. And I think it's part of the problem from my perspective, and the research we do with millennials is those of older generations, look down and say it's all your fault. You're the fault to fault for it. And I think that's why we're seeing some of the conflict we do.
Well, Grayson, let's hit this on the head then. We really want to get a better understanding, having heard from many millennials over the past few nights. We need to get a better understanding of whether this generation, Gen Y, the millennials, born between early 1980s and early 2000s, really have it worse than previous generations of 20-somethings back in the 80s or 60s or 40s or whatever. What's your experience tell you on that?
I'm actually much more on David's side with this. Like, I'm really not into the whole intergenerational warfare thing. I don't really think that it's a good conversation. It doesn't really lead anywhere. There's not really any definitive way of saying yes or no. And I also just don't think it's very productive. I think what we really need is like David alluded to take a really hard look at what we have as our socioeconomic and environmental system right now and question if that's actually the world that we want to live in. Because, young people, millennials, may be the most vulnerable group here. We may be on the front line just because we're entering the workforce. But when you look at, particularly in the States, the fact that people can be working full-time jobs and not getting by and not being able to put food on the table. Like, that is a serious problem, and I think that expands beyond these generational conversations that kind of just seem like conversations for the back of the newspaper for people to bicker about.
But you know what, let me just, let's go back to the numbers, because the reason why I wrote all those papers about the issue is because of the fact that we look at the numbers, and yes, you know, this situation with youth unemployment is not new, and it's not unique to Canada. We see it everywhere. However, if you look at the number of university graduates that live in poverty, Canada has the highest number in the whole OECD. So there is something unique to Canada that we have to tackle. It's not just a universal problem. Canada is the highest, has the highest share of university-educated people that are in poverty.
What do you think that is?
That's the issue, and I think that we have to really look at our university system relative to the college system and see to what extent they are talking to each other. Go to Germany and you can see that they are talking to each other, and you can have a BA in history and a minor in plumbing. Here, it's just a joke. But it can be a very practical solution to the problem.
You've got numbers, as David just shared, polling numbers with us, which suggest that this generation does have it worse. They're
not only relative to their parents, but also relative to other young people elsewhere.
Around the world.
Exactly.
Huh. Linda, is that your experience with this as well?
I think it's a difficult comparison to make, as obviously some things they're having more difficult, and some things are comparable, and some things are not so bad. You know, the youth unemployment rate is not at the highest that it's ever been. The people that were looking for their first job when the unemployment rate was, you know, almost at 20% or over 20% in the young categories, though they had it worse in that aspect. I think I agree with Grayson. The comparisons are not helpful. I think we need to look at where we are right now and decide how we can help everybody. You know, the baby boomers are going to be retiring. It's going to be an enormous opportunity for the millennials to take to step into the gap that's left. Yeah, it's going to take a little longer in the tough economic times, but you know, think about the baby boomers. They've had a great time. They've enjoyed themselves, and now their retirement is on the line.
Well, okay, let me follow up on that, because it is a good thing to keep all of this in perspective. If we were having this conversation about millennials 100 years ago, it was worse being a millennial 100 years ago. You were going off to Europe to fight and die. And probably 70 years ago, same thing. If you were 23, 24 years old in 1939, you'd be going overseas as well to fight and potentially die. So that's not on the horizon for you guys today. That's a good thing. But how much of your success, Roland, I'll ask you, how much of your success do you think depends on, as Benjamin said, the boomers retiring, getting out of the marketplace, opening up those jobs, and dare I say, dying so that you inherit their money and their homes?
So I actually fundamentally disagree with that. And I think it's a overly simplistic view when people just say the boomers will retire and these young people will step into their jobs, for two reasons. The first reason why is there's a huge bottleneck right now. So even if the boomers retire, this bottleneck has been built up for a number of years, and those that are not even practicing, such as if you get a license from OISE as a teacher, can come back into teaching. So the whole system is set up right now that it's going to take many, many more years till we smoothen things out. And even then, with political interests at stake, I don't know how many governments are willing to change the system. That's the first element. The second element, which no one really wants to talk about, is the impact of private sector. We've seen it with Caterpillar and Canada. We've seen it all over the world with globalization and the rise of information technology. We see it in CVS. We see it in home hardware. They are shipping jobs to wherever there is the lowest wage. They went to India. Well, guess what? India's rising. So they went to Mexico. Mexico is one of the fastest rising economies. They're moving to Indonesia. They're moving to wherever they can get the lowest wages possible, though. So there is a huge glut of jobs. The low-wage jobs are moving somewhere else. And the jobs that there are here, people do not want to enter because of stigma, such as the vocations and the trades, or because, you know what, oil and mining, well, it doesn't really sound as sexy as, say, advertising and startups, though. So we need to do a fundamental rethink about how we're going to approach this problem.
Grayson, I know you're not keen on my attempt here to foster an intergenerational war, but I'm going to try again. How much of your, if I can put it this way, plan A for living the good life depends on the boomers getting out of the way so that the Gen Ys can take their place?
Zero. I agree with a lot of what Roland was saying, just about structural changes in the economy. So I don't necessarily think that people retiring is going to open up that many jobs, because we saw with the recession that it forced people to downsize, and then they learned how to operate more efficiently on a smaller number of employees, and they just kept a smaller number of employees. So I think that really what we need to be looking for is opportunities to make our own work, and to do so in a way that we can have a clean conscience with. And that's what I'm hoping to do with my future.
Do you think the economy is structured in such a way as to allow you to do that now?
I'm figuring that out. I just graduated, so I am going to probably have a different story to tell in the future. But yeah, I really believe in starting your own thing, and I think it would be a real privilege for me one day to be able to hire my own people, and I will hire millennials, and I will hire boomers, and I'll hire everyone.
David, how much of this generation's plan A involves the boomers getting out of the way?
I think there's some, but I also think I agree that there's structural changes that happening, and to maybe give some positive to a lot of the negative that we've been talking about is that some of the leading innovation in the world today is being driven by millennials, right? Like Facebook, this was a millennial invention and has revolutionized not just how we communicate and how we learn about each other, but how we sell things to each other, right? It's changing the way business is done. And so I actually a lot of optimism that the students I teach at Carleton or those that we talk to are incredibly adaptive. So yes, they're struggling, and yes, they've got really high expectations, and they may not be landing where they think they're going to land when they're 25. But they're also really innovative, and what I always tell people is this is the first generation that had power over their parents in the sense of being the chief information officers of their household. They decided what modem we got, what cable package was the best, because their parents,
they're clueless on that stuff.
They delegated that decision to us. That was the first time, and we're seeing that in a number of other sectors in the economy. So I think there will be opportunities opened up when my parents finally decide to retire. There's going to be a little more. We're also going to have to pay for that retirement, which is a whole other public policy problem that governments haven't figured out yet, because millennials don't vote. And until that focus shifts to how am I going to pay how are my tax dollars going to pay for all those social services that my parents are going to suck up when they get old and are going to live a long, long time, I hope, Mom. We haven't answered those questions yet.
Do you see anything short of a sort of intergenerational conflict here that will get some progress made on these issues we've been talking about?
First of all, I don't think that the baby boomers are going to retire anytime soon, so that's not an issue. I don't think that they will retire anytime soon. They are healthier, they are engaged in their labor force, they are not interested in retiring, and they have to pay for all those student loans. So basically, we have seen a significant increase in the number of people aged 50 plus with debt. So clearly, there is some sort of connection there. So they're not retiring, so that's not the issue. The issue is that I think that from a demographic perspective, if you are in high school now, or if you are 10 or 12 years old, you will be fine, because the demographic story will help you. Now, if you're in your 20s, not so much. I think that young Canadians are graduating into the most exciting labor market ever.
Really?
Yes, in terms of how interesting it is, and their ability to open their own business. Even today, compared to even 10 years ago, the very existence of the internet, you can market yourself, you can create your own company and work with somebody in the US, in the UK, Europe, and create your own company, work on a project, stop it, and start a new one.
It's more dynamic.
Much more dynamic, many
but harder
opportunities.
and riskier and more problematic as well, isn't it?
And it's much more difficult to get into, and that's why the education element is so important. So we can say follow your dream, which is wonderful, but we also have to be a bit more practical, because those poverty numbers are not lying.
Roland, I got 30 seconds left here. Why don't you give your fellow millennials some advice on what they should be doing and thinking?
Absolutely. The major gap that I see in this conversation and out there, we live at high-level macro view, bird's eye view of the world, not enough jobs. We look at the micro level, blame the millennials, they're spoiled, they're entitled, and so forth. There's a meso level, which is what are millennials doing out there to be adaptable, to communicate their skills, the skills that they get from a sociology degree, number one. The second thing is, what are they doing on a daily basis on initiative? You can't be unemployed and living in East York in a $900 apartment per month. You have to make sacrifices. You have to sacrifice that expensive smartphone of yours. You have to sacrifice that Good Life membership, which you never go to. You have to make these sacrifices, and I don't see our young people really interacting with the environment and being adaptable in that sense.
I want to thank all of you for helping us out with this discussion tonight, part 4 of our Dude, Where's My Future? Linda Schweitzer from Carleton University in Ottawa. Grayson Johnson via Skype in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Grayson, great to have you on the program again. Good luck going forward, okay? And congrats on graduating from Cambridge University. Roland Mascarenas, again, congrats to you, our local OISE grad, Harvard grad, and
York. Can't forget that.
Well done, well done. Good luck to you in your future as well. Benjamin Tal from CIBC, David Coletto from Abacus Data. Thanks so much, everybody.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.